This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Abir Abu Ahmad with your top stories. OpenAI joins the IPO rush as the AI listing spree continues. Bloomberg learns that multiple institutional investors have placed orders for $10 billion or more in the SpaceX debut. Asian stocks bounce back from their biggest drop since March, and U.S. futures point to a second day higher as dip buyers swoop back to the tech trade. And President Trump says he's confident of progress in talks with Tehran as Israel and Iran pledge to end attacks after a flare-up in hostilities. Well, let's start by taking a quick look at what markets are doing this morning. Asian equities 2.5% higher, fueled by the Kospi in South Korea. It was surging about 8%. Now, this is a rebound from what we saw over the past couple of days. S&P futures also turning higher. Investors are coming back with caution. Bank of America note a couple of days ago suggests red flags emerging there. And the Euro Stoxx 50 futures down slightly 0.2%. Perhaps the lower oil picture that we're seeing out of the Middle East is contributing to that. Maybe some of the geopolitical tensions. And speaking of oil, it is ticking lower this morning. Now, there is still no resolution in the Middle East, but Israel and Iran did agree to cease hostilities for the time being, although Israel is continuing its attacks on the southern part of Lebanon. The yield on the 10-year Treasury is not doing much this morning. We await key economic data out of the U.S. tomorrow. That is CPI tomorrow, and we'll wait to see what that means for yields, but also wider inflation prospects. The U.S. dollar, it is also ticking down this morning. It's been a haven during these geopolitical uncertainties stemming out of the Middle East, but not doing much, down for a second session this morning. Now let's turn to some of the big events out of Europe today. At 7 a.m. UK time, we'll have German industrial production numbers. 3 p.m. UK time, the U.S. existing home sales. And today, U.S. primaries in Maine, Nevada, and North Dakota, as well as South Carolina. Let's set you up for the day. OpenAI has filed confidentially for an IPO, joining its rivals in a race to tap public markets to fund its growth plans. A potential listing could come by the end of this year. And now Bloomberg's deals editor, Manuel Baigori, joins us for more details on that story. Manuel, thank you for joining us. What does this listing mean for OpenAI and its growth plans?
Well, Abir, it means that the AI race continues full steam ahead. And obviously, everybody wants to jump into this bandwagon and make sure that they don't miss out on this potential huge opportunity. Everything is super keen. Investors globally are closely watching AI opportunities to invest and deploy capital. And obviously, we've been following closely SpaceX and also now OpenAI and Anthropic, which is obviously creating a very interesting dynamic and competitive tension between the companies to draw investor demand. So very exciting new step in the potential IPO, which may happen as soon as later this year. And this confidential filing is definitely a step in the right direction.
And how much is the company expected to be worth in an IPO? How much could it possibly raise in an initial public offering?
It's still a little bit too early to tell, Abir, but obviously, given the comps and the numbers we've seen in the private markets, just take into account OpenAI has been very successful fundraising privately with a very sheer valuation, and we're talking like close to $1 trillion. So in the public markets remains to be seen, but we are likely to see a higher number than that if this drive for AI continues over the coming months. And obviously the fundraise size in the listing is expected to be in the tens of billions as well, most likely. But obviously, one step at a time. This week we have SpaceX, which is suspected, to be beginning to trade potentially, and also we'll see what happens in the coming weeks and months, and how investor demand trades in the foreseeable future as well. But definitely, it's going to be a big event for this year.
So much news to digest on AI. Manuel Baigori, our deals editor, thank you for your time. Now let's see how Asian markets are doing this morning. We have Winnie Su in our Hong Kong bureau for us. Winnie?
Good morning, Abir. We are definitely seeing more stability coming through in Asia, with the MSCI Asia here extending gains to about 2.6% after having declined about 3.3% yesterday. So not really yet to recoup those losses, but definitely seeing better sentiment, specifically being supported by easing geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, lower oil prices, and also investors looking for more opportunities after that sharp AI-led sell-off. And hence you can see that Kospi here, which was hit the most yesterday, now up about 8%, and that is its biggest intraday in about 2 weeks. Also, tech gauges in Japan and Taiwan both seeing gains more than 2%. Now you flip aboard and take a look at how the tech sector really is the top driver of Asia's gains today, with the MSCI Asia tech gauge up more than 5%, and that top contributor here is SK Hynix, up 14%, pretty much erasing all losses from yesterday already. Now, this shows you how investors are becoming more selective after the sell-off, and that they are picking these major tech names that will benefit from the earnings growth, and also still very attractive valuations. Now, flip aboard, we also take a look at the latest number from China's trade data, because we are seeing pretty strong set of numbers. Specifically, when we look at export here, white line showing up 19% year over year in May, and that is the fastest in about 3 months. Also topping estimate of about 15%, and that is particularly being driven by the AI-led demand. Specifically, we're seeing pickups in the export of chips, and also the pickups of chips and computers. Now, overall, when it comes to import, also pretty positive numbers, up 27%, beating estimate of about 26%. Back to you, Abir.
Winnie Su in Hong Kong, always with those details. Now, U.S. stock futures are pointing higher again after a session which saw AI names lead a rebound on Wall Street. Let's bring in David Savage, Bloomberg MLive strategist. David, thank you for joining. So, some positivity that we're seeing today when it comes to the futures picture, but still concerns over the sustainability of this AI rally. We saw Bank of America strategists warn that now may be the time to take profits. They actually sound red flags in the U.S. market. Could they be right?
Hi, good morning. They could be, of course. I think, what we saw on Friday was a change in the volatility setup. Volatility across assets, where we look at treasuries, U.S. equities, FX, has been benign and very supportive of the risk rally that we see in the U.S. On Friday, we did see a shift higher in the VIX above 20, and that led to some really sharp sell-off on Friday. Monday, we saw the VIX start to come down, settle back towards 18, and as you said, we saw the AI trade sort of pick back up. So ultimately, the trigger for the sell-off was a jobs report that was too strong. So what we've seen on the bond market is yields moving higher, not just because inflation's been accelerating higher, but growth has been more resilient. So yes, if we see volatility start to really trend higher, that's going to hurt stocks, but the growth backdrop still remains quite supportive.
And look, we've been speaking about OpenAI's decision to file for an IPO, but also SpaceX, also Anthropic. How important is this AI listing grace, it seems, to the outlook of the market?
I think it's very important, but not because of the direct impact of what these IPOs ultimately will do for the market, but it's really a test for the momentum trade we've seen. This has been a one-way trade before Friday that went straight up. And so, first up with SpaceX, it's going to be very quickly added into the NASDAQ, very popular indexes that are, tracked by, several large ETFs. And so it certainly will be a test in terms of market liquidity, but more importantly, I think it'll be a test for momentum, equity momentum in the U.S., which has been such a huge driver of the gains we've seen year to date.
Bloomberg MLive strategist David Savage with those updates on AI. Now, still ahead, de-escalation in the Middle East as Iran and Israel pledge to end attacks that have threatened peace talks. But first, Apple looks to reboot its AI strategy after a slow start. That is next. This is Bloomberg.
Elon Musk wants to build the infrastructure for AI in space, and he's asking investors to help pay for it. The rocket, satellite, and now AI company wants to raise around $75 billion in what will be the largest IPO in history.
SpaceX is probably our greatest, commercial space company, hands down.
It will enable the next iteration of what we want to see as the space industry continues to grow.
This isn't just a space story anymore. After folding in Musk's AI startup xAI earlier this year, investors buying into SpaceX are also buying into the future potential of Grok AI models and Musk's vision for massive computing infrastructure. That ambition comes with a hefty price tag. New filings show SpaceX's AI business, as in xAI, lost nearly $6 billion last year and billions at the start of this year as money poured into computing power and infrastructure to compete with OpenAI and Anthropic. Still, SpaceX has major advantages. Starlink has become a powerful cash generator through its satellite internet business, while the company's launch operations continue to secure billions in government and private contracts.
What people need to realize about this company is it isn't just a little bit ahead of the entire launch industry on planet Earth. It's orders of magnitude ahead.
And now, Wall Street wants in. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and JP Morgan leading more than 20 banks working on the offering. And Musk negotiated record low fees. But the IPO also raises big questions like whether investors are comfortable betting not just on Musk's original vision of making humanity a multiplanetary species and getting to Mars, but on a future combining rockets, AI, and social media into one sprawling empire.
And so what we're buying is the next, the global economy, 2.0 and 3.0 as we look at buying into SpaceX.
If that happens, SpaceX could redefine what the modern public company looks like on Earth and in space.
That was Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow looking ahead to this week's SpaceX IPO. Now, Bloomberg understands that IPO is well oversubscribed, with multiple institutional investors placing orders for about $10 billion or more of SpaceX shares. I'm now joined by Bloomberg aviation and transport reporter Danny Lee. Danny, good to speak to you again. Look, SpaceX's IPO is heavily oversubscribed from what we're hearing. What does that mean for Elon Musk?
Yeah, very good morning. So that level of oversubscription from the institutional investors is key because there is a lot at stake for SpaceX to raise the $75 billion it needs to help fulfill Musk's vision and his goals. And so the current timeline is that for the institutional investors, orders will be, the banks will stop taking orders from the close of business on Wednesday in New York when the market closes. Then the banks leading the fundraiser will be able to gauge a level of demand ultimately and then set that final price. We also need to watch closely what the retail investors will do because they have been given a large allocation of this IPO, significantly more than usual, and given the funds that SpaceX wants to raise. So therefore, it will be key to gauge how much the Musk fans are buying into this IPO overall. Ultimately, this will help SpaceX raise $75 billion, that valuation of $1.8 trillion, and ultimately does put Elon Musk on track to be a trillionaire. How about that?
How about that indeed, Danny? But look, I mean, there are challenges still. How much of these challenges are investors going to have to face or navigate through, especially Musk's sprawling empire of firms?
Yeah, I think for the investors who already back or believe in Musk, they already have that Musk premium at play. It's for those investors who care more about AI, who are now looking at SpaceX more seriously. But ultimately, you're not just buying the name SpaceX or its AI advances or its advanced tech pursuits. It's ultimately all about this vision that Musk has with the hardware, the software, the AI, and that combine that with the rockets, the satellites, and the computing power and software that SpaceX has. Combine all of that, and then you've also got waiting in the wings the likes of Tesla, X and XAI, amongst others. So it's the sprawling businesses of Elon Musk which are so intertwined, interconnected, that have helped propel Elon Musk to be so influential and powerful. And therefore, with all these companies connected, it's just that SpaceX is now becoming the center of the focus, and how therefore Musk can take bigger control. And therefore, that's what investors just have to think about overall.
It's the center of the focus for the time being, but we also know that there is more in the AI race coming. Anthropic, OpenAI as well. Now, I know SpaceX has another division of the business, but what does this AI race mean for the bigger picture when it comes to the potential listings of these three major companies?
Well, I think you just have to look first of all at SpaceX. If done well, this will really help gauge the level of demand in a whole list of companies, private companies that will list, including Anthropic and XAI. And the fact that these kind of companies will be listing at such similar levels of funds needing to be raised or more or thereabouts. So, yeah, the fact that the appetite is still there, given the turmoil we've seen in the markets around AI demand and the near term. So, therefore, this will be important for SpaceX to set the tone for the wider marketplace.
A space to monitor. Bloomberg's Danny Lee in Hong Kong with the latest on SpaceX. Thank you. Now, Apple has used its flagship conference to lay the foundation for a new generation of products, making the case that it can overcome years of snags to compete in the AI area. Let's bring in Bloomberg senior strategist Neil Campling for more details on that story. Neil, this has been described as a pivotal moment for Apple. What were the main product announcements out of the event?
I think the key message was it's supposed to be a full refresh of Siri and the AI product set, but actually it was fairly underwhelming. And really what we saw is just a catch-up to where rivals such as Google already are in terms of their AI strategy. And in terms of the product sets that were announced yesterday, it was mainly around software and the integration of future products. Now, we did get some hints from those products that the new iPhones to be launched later this year could well be around a foldable iPhone because of the nature of some of those software details that we got yesterday. But as far as investors' expectations, they went into the event expecting a complete refresh of Siri and the AI strategy. And actually what we got was just very marginal improvements from a set of instructions which so far have really underwhelmed people, underwhelmed investors and users, and aren't really enough to drive an upgrade cycle in of themselves.
So you've alluded to this a little bit, but as you mentioned, the AI strategy has come a little bit under fire. During the presentation, Apple stock actually fell. Why are investors, and again, you alluded to this, but why are investors underwhelmed? What else were they expecting out of this?
I think what we were expecting to see was perhaps some use of some of the other new tools. You mentioned earlier in the program about OpenAI and Anthropic potentially coming to the market later in the year and really powering the next generation of AI. So Apple has really not embraced the use of AI in all of its technology, and certainly we got no evidence in terms of the agentic tools when you're using the AI for productive means in a business workflow. So none of those were announced yesterday. the engineers did not come away thinking that Apple now was a new alternative AI technology platform in of itself. And so that's, I think, really will weigh on investor expectations until there's proof that AI have even caught up somewhat to some of the rivals who are really powering ahead in terms of the race for AI. And Apple seems quite a way behind in terms of that particular area of technology.
So, Neil, just briefly, what does this whole debacle mean for the new incoming CEO of Apple, John Ternus?
Yeah, it's a great question, because we're really going to need to see, I think, the marrying up of the new products that come down the line with big improvements in the software and the architecture. Apple has done a great job in the past of marrying up these parts of technology, but we are going to need to see a refresh of the entire ecosystem under the new stewardship. And although he hasn't started yet, he was conspicuous by his absence from WWDC on Monday, when people had expected him to turn up at the event. So he's got big shoes to fill, obviously, but also coming at a time where we need to see, I think investors are expecting to see a step change and a leap in terms of the technology footprint that Apple has to be AI ready for the next generation.
Bloomberg's Neil Campling with the latest on the Apple story. Thank you. Now, we've got plenty more coming up on the show. Stick around with us. This is Bloomberg.
I don't think that President Xi wants to take Taiwan by force. That's my belief. I believe that if he could do it through coercion and demonstration of military capability, then he would do it that way. If there's a fight in the Taiwan Strait or in the vicinity of the Taiwan Strait, it will have a much greater impact on the global economy than what we've seen in the Strait of Hormuz.
That was former U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on the geopolitical challenges facing the United States. Now, on to some of the other stories that we're following this morning. The Pentagon has accused some of China's biggest companies of supporting the Chinese military. This includes Alibaba, Baidu, and BYD. They were included in an update to the Defense Department's list after they were withdrawn from a previous version without explanation. The Pentagon is increasingly using the list to restrict companies' abilities to contract with the U.S. military or receive research funding. A U.S. judge has struck down President Trump's $100,000 fee for H-1B visa applications, calling it an unlawful task. The judge sided with California and 19 other states that sued to block the fee, arguing it exceeded the president's authority and would harm parts of the public sector. The administration says it plans to appeal the decision. And President Trump booed as he visited Madison Square Garden for the first home NBA Finals games for the New York Knicks this century. Now, coming up, we'll talk more about Iran and Israel as they hold fire. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Abiyed Abahmed with your top stories. OpenAI joins the IPO rush as the AI listing spree continues. Bloomberg learns that multiple institutional investors have placed orders for $10 billion or more in the SpaceX debut. Asian stocks bounce back from their biggest drop since March. U.S. futures point to a second-day higher as dip buyers swoop back to the tech trade. And President Trump says he's confident of progress in talks with Tehran as Israel and Iran pledge to end attacks after a flare-up in hostilities. Well, let's see how markets are doing at 5:30 this morning. MSCI Asia Pacific still ticking up higher, 2.4% higher. Now, this is the first gain in 3 sessions, led up by a surge in the Kospi in South Korea, a bellwether really for the AI trade, and the best equities gauge so far this year. S&P futures also feeling that positive contagion, 0.3% higher at this point. Again, investors had paused the AI rally for about 3 or 4 sessions, but we're seeing them return with some caution, although a very interesting note from Bank of America a few days ago suggesting some red flags there and asking or telling investors maybe it is time to take profits. Euro Stoxx 50 futures falling 0.2% this morning. Perhaps some of the weaknesses could be stemming from the geopolitical stalemate from the Middle East. Now, speaking of the Middle East, oil prices not doing much compared to what they have been going through over the past couple of days. About 8% lower Brent crude at $93 a barrel. Now, Israel and Iran both agreed to stop hostilities against each other, but Israel is still very much involved in the southern part of Lebanon, and a truce is not yet reached. The yield on the 10-year notes not doing very much, less than a basis point lower this morning. We await key economic data out of the United States tomorrow. And the Bloomberg US dollar index, the spot index, again not doing much, a second straight day of drops, less than 0.2% lower. Now it is time for your front page news. The Financial Times leads with OpenAI's decision to file for an IPO that could value the ChatGPT creator at over $1 trillion, the latest move in the AI race to go public. The Wall Street Journal focuses on the Middle East, saying that Lebanon's ceasefire with Israel has left the country at the abyss of a new civil war and reignited sectarian tensions. And in the UK, The Telegraph leads with the investigation reporting that a secret government report has shown terrorists, hostile states and gangsters receiving more than £28 billion of foreign aid and COVID relief loans. And you can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DayBGo. Now, Iran and Israel have agreed to ease strikes against each other after a flare-up in hostilities threatened to derail negotiations to end the Iran war. The pledge comes as U.S. President Donald Trump told reporters on Iran, quote, "We could have at least an idea 1 or 2 days from now." Joining me now to discuss more about the story is Dan Williams in Jerusalem. Dan, thank you for joining us again this morning. Talk to us about the agreement between Israel and Iran. Where do we stand as of now?
Abir, this is not an agreement on paper. It's an agreement of firepower. Iran 2 days ago attacked Israel for the first time in that 2-month-old truce between Iran and the United States. It did so in defense of Hezbollah, its proxy in Lebanon. Israel responded with what it describes as forcible airstrikes, including in and around Tehran, including against a petrochemical plant in Iran, and then held fire. This was after the US president stepped in. Now, both sides are aware, I should say all 3 sides are aware, that the US president is intent on a ceasefire deal with Iran, or in the absence of a deal, on a de facto ceasefire on that front. And therefore, they're looking at what happens in Lebanon. Israel wants Lebanon decoupled from whatever happens in Iran. It sees the most immediate threat to its safety from Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Iranians want to preserve what remains of Hezbollah. That's their cat's paw in Lebanon. That's their foothold in the Levant. And therefore, they're both saying that they are willing to come to blows again over the fate of Hezbollah.
Well, Dan, Lebanon has emerged as a very sticking point for Iran to actually come to the table and sign what we've been calling the interim deal, or this MOU that would open the Strait of Hormuz and extend the ceasefire for 60 days. What challenges do the latest events bring to the talks to end the war or the wider war between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, they show how combustible those talks are. And I think what's especially interesting here, given really the lack of material damage in relative terms from this less than 24-hour long surge of fighting between Israel and Iran, it's the open rift between Israel and the United States, between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. That is new. The question is, will President Trump be willing to step in and insist that the Israelis back off in Lebanon, or will it relent on the Lebanese front and insist that the Iranians decouple Lebanon from whatever is achieved in Iranian-US talks? Now, if Trump does indeed expect the coming 2 days to produce a ceasefire deal with Iran, that will very much be front of mind for all parties involved there.
Bloomberg's Dan Williams in Jerusalem with the latest on that story. Now let's turn to another part of the world, with Chinese President Xi Jinping pledging his unwavering support for North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un during a visit to Pyongyang yesterday. The comments came as Xi vowed to expand China's ties with the nation, avoiding any public mention of North Korea's nuclear program. Joining me now is Bloomberg Chief Asia correspondent Rosalind Mattison. Roz, what can you tell us about the meeting that went on between those two leaders?
Well, certainly there's been a lot of pomp and ceremony going on. These are two places that know how to put on a parade, and they do like all the imagery of the military flag waving children and all of that. But underneath that, there is some serious messaging going on. We've got fresh comments out via China state media saying that Xi Jinping and his Korean counterpart agreed that their friendship was a traditional friendship that would last from generation to generation, which is a real reminder from China that this relationship goes back a long way. And of course, China has long been North Korea's prime economic and geostrategic ally. And that's a message, obviously, to Russia in all of this, that China remains number one. It's also a message just of the importance of the relationship to the rest of the world. Of course, China has provided economic support to North Korea over the years. They've supported each other on defence and so on, and a message to the outer world coming from that. And the areas of cooperation, everything from healthcare to agriculture, across the range of trade and investments. So Xi Jinping making his first overseas visit so far this year, choosing North Korea deliberately and very much wanting to send a message.
So the timing is also something that is intriguing. I believe the first visit in about 7 years. What is the Chinese president aiming to achieve, essentially? And you alluded a little bit to that, but if we can talk a little bit more in detail about what he's trying to achieve with this meeting with Kim Jong-un.
Well, of course, it comes after he himself hosted not just the US President Donald Trump, but then hosted the Russian leader Vladimir Putin, and has welcomed a bunch of European leaders in recent times. So sending a message again that Xi Jinping is a leader who can deal with pretty much anybody, and not many other leaders can. So showing himself really as a statesman on the global stage who can engage across the board. But very much a goal of this is to send a subtle message to Russia, which is China is number one in this relationship. Of course, Russia has drawn closer to North Korea in recent years. North Korea supported Russia in its war in Ukraine very overtly through weapons and personnel. And Xi Jinping just wants to remind North Korea just how much it relies on China, and China is a much bigger economy than Russia, and therefore perhaps wanting to reset the relationship. And certainly the messaging that's coming out so far from both sides, and a bit slow to come out from North Korea. They don't like to put stuff out very quickly, but lots of flowery, important messages coming from both sides about how they see the relationship. So for Xi Jinping, certainly it looks like a successful trip so far.
Bloomberg's Rosalind Mattison with the latest on that story. Now, before we move on with what we have for the rest of the program, a hot headline flashing across the Bloomberg terminal about the BOJ. So the Bank of Japan is mulling halting quarterly reduction in bond buying. This is according to Nikkei. So again, the Bank of Japan is mulling halting quarterly reduction in bond buying. We reported earlier that the BOJ may raise rates in October after June, according to a former official. This is something that was reported earlier today, and a story to keep an eye on, as well as the yen levels. Now, China's exports and imports surged as booming demand for artificial intelligence hardware offset disruptions from the war in Iran. Exports jumped more than 19% from a year earlier, ahead of the 15% forecast. Bloomberg's China correspondent Minmin Lo joins me now in Hong Kong to discuss more. Minmin, can you break down the trade data for us?
Yes, the trade data actually came in very positive. It topped analysts' estimates. We're talking about both exports and imports being better than expected, 19% on exports, 27% on imports. Now, a part of it is because of the lower base effects that we had, right? A year ago at this time, China's trade was badly hit by those Trump tariffs. But this year, that momentum is really being sustained by the AI demand, right? Exports of things like printed circuit breakers, like those cable optical fibers, for example, those had been soaring, and then imports as well of those chips components. In fact, imports from South Korea in particular in May had surged by 200%. So a big message to take away from that trade data breakdown is that we are seeing still some bifurcation in China's economy, right? A lot of that growth is driven by AI, but then you look at some of the other goods, traditional goods like clothing, for example, the traditional consumption is still remaining pretty flat line at this point.
Minmin, China's oil imports interestingly sank as well. What does that tell us about the state of the Chinese economy and the impact it has on global energy prices?
Yes, this is something that is quite notable from the trade data, because if you look at the breakdown of the things that are imported by China, oil imports actually fell to an 8-year low. It's down by 29%. And this really shows you the resilience of the Chinese economy, right? And its reduced reliance on imported oil. And the big debate in oil markets right now is whether or not that demand will return after the war, or is it a temporary blip here? But certainly one of the big reasons why the world is able to enjoy oil still below $100 a barrel, even with the Strait of Hormuz largely closed, is because of China really declining its oil imports. It's drawing down on its reserves, relying less on imports, but more on the refinery-held reserves. It's also placing curbs on exports as well to preserve domestic supply. There's also the electrification of the economy, everything from electricity to EVs. Again, question is, does this signal that permanent shift away from reliance on oil, and that has huge implications on the long-term oil price trajectory?
Yeah, sure does. Bloomberg's Minmin Lo in Hong Kong for us with the latest. Now, coming up, why a British-born television personality is in the running for the governorship of America's most populous state. That story is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. The race for California governor is on track for a two-person runoff in November between Democratic politician Xavier Becerra and British-born Republican Steve Hilton. Becerra takes first place in the primary with more than 27% of the vote, while Hilton is in second at 25%. This is according to a tally by Decision Desk HQ. I'm now joined by Bloomberg's John Herskovitz to talk more about the story. John, why are the key issues in the race? What are the key issues in the race, rather, and how have those candidates positioned themselves, really?
Sure. What we're seeing in California is what we're seeing in a lot of parts of the United States. The key issues are the cost of living, affordability, high housing costs, education also fits in. And we're seeing a real contrast in personalities. On the Democratic side, we have Becerra. He has a deep political resume. He served as a congressman, attorney general, and as the U.S. Health Secretary. On the Republican side, we have this disruptor, Hilton, a former Fox TV host, backed by Trump. And you're seeing the approaches of these two candidates to the issues played out as their personalities match. with Becerra, he's looking at increasing housing, finding ways to lower prices, protect working families. For Hilton, he's looking at tax cuts, deregulation, and also trying to make California the crypto capital of the world. So we have these really two stark contrasts of candidates, but the issues are quite familiar with a lot of Americans.
So stark differences between them, and there are national implications involved in this. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what are those implications that are involved in this election?
Sure. California is the biggest Democratic state. It's a bellwether of the party. And you have the battle that's going to be going on between progressives and moderates in the state with whether they'll support Becerra or not. And also, this is a question of how far Trump's reach goes, whether he can actually sway voters in California, have his person pick up some votes. And it's you have these things playing out, and also the oversized role that California plays economically for manufacturing, job creation, and also the way it attracts people from across the country. So how the California economy goes has a deep impact on the U.S. economy, on manufacturing, and also creation of jobs. So we have the Trump factor, the Democratic schism between progressives and moderates, and the overall state of the U.S. economy all playing out in this very large state that's up for grabs.
Bloomberg's John Herskowitz with that interesting story. Now, on to some of the other corporate news we're following today. The Financial Times reports GSK is in discussions to purchase cancer treatment maker Nuvalent for more than $9 billion. The deal reportedly has the two firms locked in talks with the goal of reaching an agreement as soon as this week. The paper says it would be one of the British company's biggest ever purchases. AstraZeneca says its experimental obesity pill helped patients lose up to 11.8% of their body weight in a mid-stage trial. That's below the results seen by Eli Lilly's rival pill, but Astra says the data is strong enough to compete in the fast-growing weight loss market. The company also highlighted lower dropout rates due to side effects, with 5% of patients leaving the study compared with as much as 17% in Lilly's earlier trial. And Bloomberg understands that UBS has slashed its sustainability office in Asia, cutting its headcount by half in recent months as part of a broader global restructuring. The Zurich-based lender has reduced its 7-person Asia team to 3 employees. And Monte de Paschi is assessing rival bids from Intesa Sanpaolo and Banco BPM for the world's oldest bank. Let's discuss more on this evolving story with the team leader for EU Finance, Stephen Ahrens. Stephen, two banks are trying to do a deal with Paschi, Intesa, and Banco BPM. Which one is more likely to win this battle?
It's a tough question to answer at this point because one of the options, the one from BPN, doesn't have very clear terms. They made sort of a pitch on Sunday saying, look, we want to merge with you. And then the following day, Intesa came forward and said, we want to buy Monte Paschi, saying they're going to pay $30.6 billion for it. So Monte Paschi right now has two options on the table. One, very abstract and unclear, and the other one, pretty strong. So right now, it looks Intesa has more momentum behind its bid, also because there's been coordination, preparation in it. So right now, looking from today, it looks Intesa has the stronger cards.
And look, we've also heard from the Italian finance minister. How does the government of Meloni view any potential deal between those lenders?
The Italian government was careful not to take sides. They've always had a very strong view on banking. They want a very strong banking system. They've blocked other deals. They last year blocked another deal that was proposed. So they have a very strong role to play. But yesterday's statement shows they're careful not to make a decision just yet, and said, in the end, it's always about price. It's about the money that each party is willing to pay for Monte Paschi, where the government still has a stake of, I think, about 5%.
And look, this follows news that we've been talking about since the beginning of the year about UniCredit as well as its own ambitions. How does that play into the wider M&A goals?
It certainly fuels the deals activity that has been a hallmark, really, of the Italian banking system for almost 2 years now, with UniCredit being at the forefront of that. The deal I was just talking about that failed last year was a proposal from UniCredit for Banco BPM, the bank that is now bidding for Monte Paschi. Monte Paschi itself bought another bank last year, so there's really a lot of stuff going on in the Italian banking market. UniCredit is very, very attentive to all of this. They don't want Intesa, which is the largest bank, to become even stronger than them in their home market. So I'm sure UniCredit, the CEO, Andrea Ogel, is sitting there thinking about his next move.
Bloomberg's Stephen Ahrens with all that detail about M&A activity in Italy. Now, plenty more is coming up. Stick around with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, before we head into the end of the show, let's take a look at some of the interesting charts that our teams have prepared. Semis bounce, EM breaks. This is the story of the day. The SOX, the index that gauges how semiconductors are faring in the United States, is surging more than 90% this year, despite some stabilization that we saw earlier. But this is how it is against EMs. And then if we flip the board, we take a look at how U.S. equities in general have stabilized after a sell-off that we saw in AI trade. Now, later today, we'll hear more from Intesa Sanpaolo CEO Carlo Messina. That exclusive interview is on the pulse at 9 a.m. UK time. The opening trade is up next. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.